Carl Jung's most profound discovery wasn't just about empathy. It was about the journey highly sensitive individuals must take from being wounded to becoming warriors. He observed that this transformation could either destroy a person completely or reveal a psychological strength they never knew they had. Through his work on individuation and the archetype of the wounded healer, Jung described a pattern I call sensitivity transformation syndrome. Here, emotionally sensitive people either remain trapped in victimhood or undergo shadow integration, emerging as integrated, powerful, and authentically whole. Jung called this process transformative because sensitive individuals carry the potential of the wounded healer, the ability to turn psychological pain into wisdom and resilience. But this required a choice, to integrate the shadow instead of identifying with wounds. For Jung, this wasn't just personal healing, but the very essence of individuation, the human task of transforming unconscious suffering into conscious strength. Through shadow work and self-realization, one of Jung's breakthroughs came from observing a patient who embodied the wounded healer paradox. This person could offer profound insights and healing to others, yet remained trapped in their own suffering. Despite having the tools for transformation, they resisted healing, clinging to their wounded identity as though it were their most valuable possession. They feared that letting go of their pain would strip away their empathy, their connection to others, and even their sense of purpose. Jung recognized this as wound identification, mistaking hurt for helpfulness, suffering for sensitivity, and victimhood for virtue. What troubled him most was realizing how widespread this pattern was. Many sensitive people unconsciously sabotage healing, fearing that strength will erase their gifts or make them ordinary. True transformation, he concluded, requires more than therapy. It demands a complete identity shift from victim to victor, from wounded to whole. Jung also uncovered why so many resist healing, despite wanting it consciously. He called this wound attachment syndrome, where pain becomes essential to identity. 3 forces hold this in place. First is shadow rejection and false light. Wounded empaths often create angel identities, denying anger, selfishness, or power, and projecting these qualities onto others. They fear their own strength, associating it with the abusers who hurt them. Second is suffering as currency. Pain becomes a source of attention, sympathy, and even moral superiority. Healing threatens this psychological economy, making wounds feel like proof of depth and worth. Third is identity terror. Many fear that without their wounds, they won't know who they are. Transformation feels like ego death, demanding the sacrifice of the familiar self for the unknown, authentic self. Jung went further, identifying what he called addiction to powerlessness. For some empaths, victimhood unconsciously provides benefits that empowerment does not. Powerlessness offers protection from failure, criticism, and responsibility. It can even be used as inverse power, a way to influence others through guilt or sympathy rather than direct assertion. In some cases, it becomes a form of moral superiority, where suffering is used to claim spiritual or emotional elevation. Many also fear that if they develop strength, they'll become like their oppressors, failing to realize that conscious power heals while unconscious weakness often enables harm. For Jung, the rise of the empath beyond the shadow, the transformation from wounded to warrior, was not only the highest form of healing, but the very pinnacle of psychological development. It is the alchemical shift where wounds no longer define identity, but instead fuel authentic strength, wisdom, and wholeness. Jung emphasized that recognizing these patterns isn't about self-blame. It's about understanding the unconscious dynamics that block true empowerment and transformation. If you've ever felt strangely attached to your pain, it may be a sign you're ready to evolve beyond it. The 4 stages of empathic evolution. Jung outlined 4 stages that sensitive individuals move through on the path from wounded victim to integrated warrior. Stage 1. The unconscious absorber. At this stage, empathy feels like a burden. These empaths absorb others' emotions without boundaries, constantly overwhelmed and convinced their sensitivity is a curse. They unconsciously attract toxic situations that reinforce their victim identity. Growth begins when they realize their sensitivity is not punishment, but information about their own developmental needs. Stage 2. The wounded helper. Here, empaths use their pain to support others but resist their own healing. They believe their wounds are the source of their gifts, fearing that healing would weaken their empathy. Jung observed that the real breakthrough happens when they understand that self-healing enhances, rather than diminishes, their capacity to help others authentically. Stage 3, the shadow integrator. This stage marks a turning point. Empaths begin reclaiming rejected aspects of themselves: anger, power, assertiveness. It feels threatening, as if embracing the shadow means becoming like their abusers. Yet integration reveals that owning the shadow makes them more authentic and paradoxically more empathic, since they no longer project their darkness onto others. Stage 4, the integrated warrior. The final stage represents conscious empathy, the blending of sensitivity with strength. These individuals feel deeply but remain grounded, help others without losing themselves, and embody compassion with healthy boundaries. They often emerge as leaders and healers, proving that wounds can transform into wisdom, and sensitivity into power. The dangers of transformation. Jung warned that the wounded-to-warrior journey is not without hazards. Identity annihilation crisis. Healing can feel like ego death, terrifying those whose entire identity is built around suffering. Many retreat back to familiar pain rather than face the uncertainty of self-discovery. Relationship. Apocalypse. As empaths heal, relationships often destabilize. Friends, partners, or family members who benefited from their self-sacrifice may resist or sabotage their growth, creating painful isolation during transformation. Shadow terror. Facing repressed anger, selfishness, or power drives can feel overwhelming. Without guidance, empaths may fear they're becoming bad, causing them to repress again instead of integrate. Spiritual bypass trap. Some attempt to escape their wounds through spiritual practices, avoiding shadow work. This creates a fragile love and light identity that collapses under real stress. Inflation explosion. During healing, some develop grandiosity, believing they're superior to others still struggling. This blocks true integration, replacing wholeness with ego inflation. Jung's methodology for integration to navigate these dangers. Jung developed systematic approaches: active shadow engagement, consciously reclaiming disowned parts of the psyche instead of projecting them onto others. This includes dream work, confronting judgments, and practicing healthy expression of suppressed emotions. Conscious boundary architecture, building boundaries without guilt, learning to recognize manipulation, and practicing energetic sovereignty. Jung emphasized that boundaries are not walls but filters, protecting the self while allowing healthy connection. Through these methods, Jung showed that the path from wounded victim to integrated warrior is not only possible, but represents the highest form of psychological development. Maintaining healthy boundaries. Jung emphasized the importance of separating one's emotions from those of others. True empathy thrives when supported by boundaries. It prevents depletion, resentment, and emotional burnout. Empaths must also develop authentic power, not by avoiding strength out of fear of becoming oppressive, but by learning to use it consciously. Authentic power means asserting needs directly, speaking truth even when uncomfortable, and stepping into leadership when it serves the greater good. This differs from false power, which is rooted in domination and ego. Identity reconstruction for empaths. Transformation requires rediscovering who they are beyond their wounds while keeping their sensitivity intact. Jung encouraged reorienting identity from victimhood to healer or warrior archetypes. This process includes exploring talents and interests outside of trauma, finding creative or healing outlets for sensitivity, and practicing service from wholeness rather than sacrifice. In this way, empaths can sustain their care for others without depleting themselves. Transformation success and failure. Jung highlighted key examples of those who turned wounds into strength versus those who remained trapped. Viktor Frankl transformed his suffering in the Holocaust into logotherapy, teaching meaning-making through adversity. He didn't remain a victim but used pain as a teacher, balancing sensitivity with resilience. Nelson Mandela endured 27 years in prison, yet emerged as a leader who combined empathy with strength. He embodied compassion, forgiveness, and justice, showing how wounds can fuel collective healing. In contrast, Jung described the professional victim, those who build identities or careers around their wounds without healing. These trauma entrepreneurs resist growth because it threatens their sense of specialness, often fostering dependency rather than empowerment in others. Elements of success. What separates transformation from stagnation is willingness. Jung noted 3 essentials: taking responsibility for healing instead of waiting for rescue, viewing wounds as teachers rather than permanent identity, and risking the loss of victim status for authentic empowerment. This requires what Jung called psychological heroism, the courage to face uncomfortable truths and break free from familiar wounded patterns. The role of community transformation rarely happens in isolation. Jung stressed the need for support networks that encourage growth rather than reinforce victimhood. He called these allies growth catalysts, people who celebrate boundaries, encourage responsibility, and embody integrated sensitivity themselves. Equally important is avoiding wound bonding, relationships built primarily on shared trauma. Though they feel intimate, they often keep people stuck by reinforcing victim stories or competing over suffering. In contrast, healthy relationships nurture growth, allowing both individuals to evolve. Transformation. Communities and mentorship. Jung envisioned communities that honor both sensitivity and strength, therapeutic groups focused on empowerment, creative spaces where sensitivity fuels artistry, and spiritual settings that emphasize integration instead of bypassing. Mentors who embody integrated empathy serve as living proof that transformation is possible. By modeling how wounds can become wisdom, they inspire others to continue the journey. The 5 phases of evolution. Jung mapped out the stages of transformation. Pain recognition. Without purpose, the empath begins facing wounds directly rather than denying or numbing them. This phase often feels hardest because suffering is seen without yet knowing its potential for growth. The breakthrough comes when sensitivity is no longer seen as punishment, but as guidance toward psychological development. The wounded to warrior journey of empaths. Phase 2. Shadow confrontation and integration. At this stage, empaths face the parts of themselves they've disowned, anger at being used, suppressed selfishness, and rejected personal power. This often brings guilt and fear of becoming like those who hurt them. The lesson here is learning the difference between healthy assertiveness and harmful aggression. By owning their shadow, empaths become more authentic and paradoxically more genuinely empathic. Phase 3. Boundary. Construction and testing. Empaths begin to set boundaries that protect their sensitivity while allowing real connection. This often provokes resistance from people who are used to unlimited access. Growth happens when empaths learn to tolerate others' disappointment without abandoning themselves just to restore harmony. Phase 4. Power reclamation and purpose discovery. Here, empaths reclaim their authentic power and learn to use their sensitivity for larger purposes. They pursue their own goals, express their truth, and step into leadership roles when their empathic insights can guide and serve others. Phase 5. Warrior integration and service. Empaths reach what Jung called conscious empathy, holding deep sensitivity with unshakable strength. They can feel pain without drowning in it, help without depleting themselves, and serve without losing balance. Many become teachers, healers, or leaders, showing others how to transform wounds into wisdom. Common traps that derail integration. Jung warned about pitfalls that block the wounded to warrior transformation. Spiritual bypassing, using meditation, forgiveness, or positivity to escape real shadow work. This creates a false strength that collapses under stress. True growth requires integrating, not avoiding, wounds, victim to perpetrator swing, overcorrecting from powerlessness to domination. This reactive strength protects but also isolates. Conscious empowerment blends power with compassion. Healing superiority. Complex. Believing one's progress makes them spiritually superior. This only recreates the old victim-oppressor dynamic in reverse. Real empowerment includes humility. Isolation trap. Withdrawing completely from relationships in the name of healing. Some solitude is healthy, but complete withdrawal prevents practicing new skills and limits growth. Jung advised re-engaging with supportive people while holding boundaries. The cultural role of transformed empaths. Jung saw warrior empaths as crucial for collective growth. They model integrated empathy, sensitivity combined with strength, filling a cultural gap where most societies swing between emotional suppression and overwhelm. Relationship revolution. Transformed empaths show that intimacy thrives on boundaries, not self-sacrifice. They embody conscious partnerships built on mutual empowerment. Collective healing. Integrated empaths can process community trauma without being overwhelmed, making them essential in times of cultural crisis. Accelerating consciousness. Each empath who integrates shadow adds to humanity's collective wisdom, proving that empathy and power can coexist. The unstoppable rise. The journey from wounded to warrior turns sensitivity from a burden into the greatest strength. Jung's framework shows that true resilience doesn't come from abandoning empathy, but from integrating it with personal power and healthy boundaries. The warrior empath emerges able to witness suffering without drowning, help without self-sacrifice, and remain compassionate without betraying themselves. This transformation is not just personal. It advances humanity's evolution toward wholeness and authentic empowerment. If you're ready to turn wounds into wisdom and sensitivity into strength, declare, "I choose warrior over victim." Thanks for watching. See you in the next dimension.